Welcome to the Breaking Into Finance podcast. My name is Craig Thompson, and this is the open source field guide to help you understand everything you need to know about breaking into finance. Let's dive in. Usually in acquisitions, there's this thing called synergies, which I feel like is often panned as like a made up business word, but it's a real thing, which is basically to say when one company buys another company, usually in many different places, but at least in one area, there are likely two different employees that do the same thing for each company. And it doesn't take that employee like double the time to do all of their tasks for like two companies worth of stuff. And so when one company buys a smaller company, usually not all of the employees come along in the acquisition. This is my like kind way of saying that they're like layoffs as a result of these acquisitions. That means you get the same revenue power with fewer costs. And so acquisitions can oftentimes create value or create synergies as a result. And that would be like a cost synergy, which is to say, you have these 5 people that do this one thing. We have 5 people that do the same thing. We could buy you and lay off the 5 people that were doing it for you, and we'll have the same 5 people doing it for both of us.
Does synergies, is that word just used to talk about like humans, or could it also mean to be like you could have synergy in terms of like your market presence or like
absolutely both
channels that you cost efficiencies or
and so that's like you'll hear people talk about cost synergies, you'll hear people talk about revenue synergies, and then there's like within cost synergies, it's like, we, Coca-Cola, have relationships with all of these distributors. Every store in America like sells our products. And so if we buy this startup that has this cool new soft drink, there are synergies related to allowing them to leverage our distribution. And you might argue that that's something like, you could argue that that's like both cost and revenue synergies, because you could argue that like maybe the startup had people who are like trying to figure out a distribution strategy and you don't need them. And you could also argue that this startup with Coca-Cola's distribution presence will get more revenue just like immediately. I will say, when you as a public company that is acquiring this other company are talking about all of your synergies, investors tend to find specific people related or like plant related cost synergies more believable than revenue synergies. Like you might say there are both, and you might be right, but there's usually a leap of faith required in projecting revenue synergies. Whereas like, if I just said, like we had these 5 guys, they had those 5 guys, we laid off those 5 guys, so that's less cost. You're like, oh yeah, that's obvious. And like, that's not up for debate. Like you just will lay them off and your costs will go down.
Yeah, because there's not really a great way to like put a dollar figure on what a market presence or like market and brand synergy might.
Yeah. And if you pay McKinsey, their $2 million fee, they will put a dollar value on that for you. They will tell you. But in terms of, like messaging that to investors, it is easier for an investor to believe the cost synergy story than the revenue synergy story. And so oftentimes a company might not get credit for announced revenue synergies until it happens. But you're absolutely right. Like synergies can apply to any of these things.
But you said McKinsey, like some, firms, like that's part of their job is to like calculate dig up these figures.
That is a very common project that a management consultant would work on at like one of like, the McKinsey, Bain, BCGs, others of the world, where a private equity fund or a company will hire them and be like, hey, we're looking at buying this other company. We think there might be some synergies. Can you try to estimate what those might be for us? And they would basically put hand-wavy numbers likely around a lot of these, but they're smart people. Usually they're like directionally right, if not like actually like pretty close to the right number. But then, there's like, do you as the company that commissioned them believe them is different from how a public market investor might believe management telling you what McKinsey told them.
An imperfect science.
Yeah. That does it for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. And remember to check out our website, breakingintofinancepodcast.com, where you can submit questions, join our Substack to stay up to date on new content releases, and much, much more. We'll see you next time.